Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. And we do have quite a few games launching this week, so this is probably going to be a longer episode. I'm going to have to film this over multiple nights because there's no way I can do this in a single go. I usually start these videos with a bit of news and announcements, but luckily I don't have anything to go over this week. But I do just want to give a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns, so he is partially to blame for all the hours that I need to put into this. But if you do like this sort of content, Alex also puts out his own video going over the entire month, but focusing more on those heavy hitters and games that are getting a lot of follows. So if you do like these videos but you want to get a bit more of a sneak peek into the future, definitely check out his channel, and he has a ton of other videos as well going into reviews and playthroughs and all sorts of different commentary on the industry. And if you're interested in historical war games, you'll want to go ahead and check out Zilla Blitz because there is a bunch of other crowdfunding platforms for these games that both Alex and I don't cover in near as much detail as Michael does over at Zilla Blitz. He does a fantastic job and focuses exclusively on this genre of games. But if that's still not enough games, you can go ahead and check out QVO Games or Grant Line because these are two great channels that do keep you up to date with all the games launching in retail. They both have their own style, but both offer great info as well. So you can find links to all these channels in the description down below if you want to show them some love, and make sure to subscribe if you do like their content. But like I said, we do have quite a lot of games to dive into here, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on September 16th, and this one is for the Ludos Ancient Games collection, focusing on games that originated in Africa. And if you're not familiar with this team, they've actually put out a few different campaigns already, all focused on games either about or originating from different regions of the world. And I really like what they're doing with the Ancient Games collection because their whole goal here is to try and take these traditional games to these various regions and just make them a little bit more available and known to the public so that they're not lost to time. Games are all travel friendly and they've all been updated with some really nice looking modern artwork. And the best thing about this campaign is that it is a pay what you want. This is really nice because it does help the game get out to more people regardless of their financial situation, but if you can't afford it, just keep in mind that all of this does cost money to design and manufacture, and of course all the time that goes into it, and also running the campaign itself. And I'm just going to go ahead and apologize on my pronunciation in advance here, but the first game that we have in this collection is called Yote, and this one is a strategy game that is similar to checkers. Players are going to be taking turns deploying and moving their tokens out on the board, and whenever you move, you just move one space adjacent to where you already are. But if you are next to an opponent's piece, you are able to jump over it in order to capture it. The difference here that makes it a lot different than checkers is that you're not going to have all your pieces out at the beginning of the game, and also anytime that you capture an opponent's piece, you have the opportunity to take any one of their other pieces out on the board, adding a whole other layer of strategy. Also, the camels are a lot cooler. First player to capture all their opponent's camels or leave their opponent with no valid moves wins the game. This next one is called Oware, and it's probably my favorite of the collection, and if you're familiar with the game Mancala, this probably looks familiar to you, and it does play similar to that game. But the difference here is that you're going to be starting the game with 4 seeds in each space out on the board. The side of the board towards you is your territory, and the side of the board towards your opponent is your opponent's territory. Players are just going to be taking turns back and forth, but on your turn you're going to be taking all the seeds from a single space on your side of the board, and then you're going to be moving counterclockwise, placing 1 seed in each space as you move around that board. And you can do this to move into your opponent's territory, and you'll just be continually placing seeds until you run out of seeds. But if the last seed that you place is in an opponent's space, and it also ends up causing that space to have exactly 2 or 3 seeds in it, then you get to capture those seeds, taking them into your own personal supply. This is important because the first player to gain 25 seeds is the winner of the game. But the fun doesn't stop there, and this is the aspect of the game that I really like, and that's that whenever you do this, it could have a cascading effect, because you're going to be looking one by one through all the spaces backwards that you just put a seed into, and if that space also has either 2 or 3 seeds in it, then you'll be able to take those as well. Like I said, you are going one by one backwards through the spaces, so if you ever run into a space that doesn't meet that, then you're going to be stopping there and it's going to be the other player's turn. Mancala is a great game, and this one looks like a really fun spin on it. And the third game offered in this collection is called Dara, and this one is another strategy game. And the way that this game works is that players are each going to have their own pieces, and at the start of the game, you're going to be taking turns putting those pieces out onto the board. And then once all the pieces are placed, you're going to be taking turns moving a piece orthogonally. Your goal here is to try and get 3 of your pieces in a row, because that's going to do 2 things for you. It's going to prevent those pieces from being taken from you by your opponent, but it also allows you to take 1 piece from your opponent that isn't already in a row of 3. But of course, each player does have limited pieces here, so you're not just going to be able to leave all your pieces in those rows of 3 secured and safe from your opponent. You will have to break them up and venture out, making your pieces vulnerable, but also creating an opportunity to create more rows of 3. And that's important because it's the player that captures 10 of their opponent's pieces first that wins the game. And the final game offered in this collection is another one that I think looks like a lot of fun, and this one is called Fanorona. And this one is also a strategy game where players are going to be taking turns just moving 1 of their stones on their turn. The way that you move a stone is just by sliding it to an adjacent intersection point, and what you're trying to do here is capture your opponent's pieces. This game actually offers 2 different ways that you can do that. The first way is to move one of your pieces adjacent to an opponent's piece, but you also have to move your piece towards that piece, so it needs to be in the same line as your movement. And if you do that, you'll be able to take that piece. This means that if this yellow piece moved 1 space to the left here, it would end up taking this opponent piece because it is adjacent to them and also in the direction that they're moving. But they wouldn't be able to take this other piece that's adjacent to them because it wasn't in the direction that they're moving. But the second way that you can take an opponent's piece is when you are already adjacent to it, and then you move away from it directly in the opposite direction. So that example that I gave earlier with this yellow piece moving to the left would actually end up removing 2 different pieces because it's directly adjacent to this opponent piece here to the right, and then it's moving directly away from it, so that would allow them to take that piece. And then since they moved adjacent to that other piece, like I said before, they would also take that one. This could also cascade in taking even more pieces because whenever a stone is captured, all the opponent pieces continuously in a line beyond that stone are also taken as well. But those are the games in the Ludos Africa collection. If any of those sound interesting to you, you can go ahead and check them out, and I'll leave a link to the campaign in the description down below. Also on the 16th, we have LA1, and this one is a cooperative game where players are going to be playing as investigators, trying to solve various crimes in a post-apocalyptic Los Angeles. Players are going to be playing through a series of different scenarios that can have all sorts of different outcomes depending on the decisions of the players. And the game plays over a series of rounds where at the start of each round you're going to be drawing a darkness card, which is going to tell the players how Los Angeles is going to be affecting them for that round. Players will then take turns performing 2 actions in order to move around to the different areas on the board, collect different resources, activate their abilities, and investigate different points of interest. The main board's broken into a few different sections that each have their own social class of people that you'll be able to interact with, as well as their own dangers associated with that region. And in order to investigate and make progress with the overarching scenario, players are going to have to go up against some different skill checks. But this is also a deck building game, and skill cards don't come for free, and you will have to spend actions in order to draw them from your deck. But then you'll be spending them to try and meet the requirements of that skill test. But whether you succeed or fail in that skill check, the story is going to be continuing for that scenario, and those successes and failures, as well as the decisions of the players, are all going to be guiding the way that that story unfolds. If you're interested to learn more about this one, there is an entire how to play video already posted on the campaign page, so you can go ahead and check that one out, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below. And now launching on the 17th, we have the game Scarce, which is a campaign that I did cover a few weeks ago, but it got pushed back until now, so I already do have footage for this one, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is another really interesting one that can be played both competitively and cooperatively. This one takes place in a post-apocalyptic flooded world where humanity is surviving on floating cities. Of course, in order to actually have a sustainable city, you do need to have your own source of power, and players are going to be working together to try and build a power plant in order to power their city. And if playing in the competitive mode, you're going to be gaining a certain amount of points depending on your contributions towards that power plant, in addition to some other sneaky ways where you can also gain victory points. The power plant's going to be represented by this board that's populated with a bunch of different mission cards that will be randomized from game to game. and players will be trying to complete those mission cards by gathering and delivering different resources, but then also gaining points for contributing uranium in the bottom of the track here, or contributing any of your own power that you were able to generate on your own personal ship. And this is a really neat aspect of the game because each player is going to have their own ship that starts with just the single board at the top here, and you'll be able to purchase upgrades as you play the game in order to extend your ship with different modules that add additional locations for you to store resources, store crew, or store different types of abilities. But the fun doesn't stop there because the ship is also amphibious, and you're going to be gathering resources from both above and below the surface, and the game offers a multi-dimensional board where players are going to be navigating their ships and then diving down to the lower board whenever they submerge into the ocean. What's also nice about this is that you don't have to set it up this way if you do find it a little bit more fiddly or difficult to reach around the table. The game was also designed to be played flat, which works just as well, but of course doesn't look nearly as cool. But each player starts the game with a captain card, which is going to give them some sort of special ability, but then also a deck of starter cards, which they're going to be using to take various actions throughout the game. At the start of your turn, you're going to be drawing 4 more cards into your hand, and they're going to be taking actions either from your captain card, from the crew tiles out on your board, or even from completed mission cards. And only after you've done any of those actions will you be able to play the actions from your cards. And what's neat about these cards is they're actually multi-use, and there's 3 different ways that you can use them. You can either use them for the movement amount that's depicted on the top of the card, and there's going to be an amount of movement for if you're on the surface of the ocean, an amount of movement if you are submerged. Whenever you do this, you're going to be moving your ship out on the board up to that many movement points and then gaining the benefit of whatever location you have stopped on. At the start of the game, there's going to be a bunch of different tokens that are put out on the various hexes out on the board. These can do things like gain you additional energy for your ship or resources, or even give you minerals that are required for the power plant mission cards. The minerals are a bit of a special token because you're not able to just take them as soon as you stop on them, and you will have to take a harvest action either from one of the abilities from your shipboard or by using one of your other cards. But whenever you are able to take one of these tokens, you'll get the benefit that's depicted on the top of it, and then you'll also flip it to its opposite side, which will give you some sort of unknown benefit. Not only that, but you also get to keep the token, which is worth a victory point at the end of the game. Of course, rather than movement, you could just spend one of these cards in order to take the associated ability that's outlined on that card, with a lot of these requiring you to spend some amount of energy or resources from your ship. But the final thing you can do with these cards is to just take a basic action, and you can discard any card to be able to do this, and that's going to allow you to either dive, surface, or upgrade your ship, or contribute minerals to one of those mission cards. If you have any cards left over after you've taken all the actions that you're able to, you are allowed to hang on to 2 of those cards and carry them forward into the next round, so there is sometimes a reason not to spend a card if you think it will be more useful in the future. One thing to note about the multi-level board here is that the tokens on the ocean floor normally are a lot nicer than the ones on the surface, but they are also more dangerous to get access to. If you ever start your turn while you're submerged, you're going to have to draw an encounter card, and that's going to require you to discard some amount of resources in order to win against whatever encounter you happen to run into. This will also gain you some sort of benefit, so it's not all bad, but if you're not able to meet the requirements of that encounter, then it's going to have some sort of negative consequence. The game continues like this over a series of rounds with different in-game events causing the time tracker to move forward, and once it reaches the end of the track, it's going to be the player with the most victory points that wins the game. You're going to be gaining 10 victory points for any of the mission cards that you were able to complete, as well as gaining additional victory points for any of your contributed resources to the power plant. Then you'll also gain victory points outlined on any of the cards that you're able to purchase, and finally from the tokens that you were able to collect. In the cooperative version of this game, there's going to be another city that's moving in to try and overtake your city. And they're going to have different units that they're going to be deploying out on the board, occupying different spaces and causing trouble for the players. And of course, the players are going to be trying to complete their power plant before that city catches up with them. But not only that, the players will have to sustain their city along the way, and there's going to be different points in the game where you're going to have to each contribute some amount of resources. And if any player is not able to do that, then that is another way to instantly lose the game. But if you're able to keep that city supplied while also completing that power plant, then the players win the game. And if you are interested to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on September 17th, we have Aetherspire, and this one is a cooperative tower building game where players are going to be trying to build these towers in order to defeat 4 different bosses. The game provides a bunch of different bosses to choose from, but at the start of the game, players are going to be taking one boss of each elemental type, and and then shuffling those together and then distributing them face down on the right-hand side of the board here. The bosses don't do anything while they're face down, but players are going to be moving a token down this track as they move through the rounds in the game, and anytime that the token reaches a spot that's connected to a boss card, that boss card is going to be flipped right side up, and then whatever negative effect is outlined on that card is going to be in play until the players defeat that boss. Luckily, each player also gets to choose their own character at the start of the game, with each character having special abilities that can help you along the way. And then the game just plays over a series of rounds as players try to build those towers to try and defeat those enemies. And you can see the main board here has a few different outlined areas where you're going to be building those towers. And there's a few different things that you do on your turn. The first thing you're going to be doing is drawing a floor tile from any of the available stacks. And this doesn't allow you to build that right away, but instead it's going to be putting it into a shared supply that you will be able to build from later by using your actions. You're then going to draw 3 resources from the resource bag, and then you're just going to be putting it in the shared pool in the top left corner of the board. And these resources just represent different elements, and you'll be able to combine them in different ways in order to take some bonus actions. But until then, they just remain in the pool here, and then you're going to be rolling 5 of the action dice. These dice are going to have different icons on them that you're going to be able to spend to perform some basic actions. These actions could be to build one of those tiles from your supply out on the main board, but in order to do this, you do need to meet a few other requirements, with the first one being that certain tiles can only be built upon certain other tiles. And then also you do need to have all the appropriate pillars built before you can build on top of a tile. Building those pillars is one of the other actions that you might be able to perform, and you're doing all of this to try and build a tower of at least 4 floors height, because once you're able to do that, you can actually complete a tower, which allows you to put this cap on the top of it along with one of the elemental crystals. And depending on the type of the elemental crystal that gets put on top of it, you're going to be removing the boss that matches that elemental type. But the benefits don't stop there, because when you do complete a tower, you also get to choose one of the reward tokens that are going to be offered in the game. There's going to be a few on display, and these are going to be some one-time use abilities that will give you some sort of benefit. But aside from the different actions that the dice will offer you, you might also find yourself gaining some different resources of the different elemental types. And like I mentioned before, they do go in this pool here in the top left corner of the board. And what you can also do on your turn is spend any amount of these to activate the different spells on this section of the board. And these can allow you to do things like draw additional tiles, roll additional dice, or even move, destroy, or convert the different invaders into resources. Now, I haven't mentioned the invaders yet, but at the end of your turn, you're going to be moving the token down this track, and this is known as the invader track, because whenever your token moves down this track, not only can it possibly flip one of the boss cards, like I mentioned before, but it's also going to add the number of invaders to the board as indicated in the space where the token moves to. The invaders move into any of the available spaces on your tiles that aren't already occupied by a pillar, which means that they are going to be blocking you from building those pillars until you are able to move them. Not only that, but if there isn't a space for that invader to move into, then instead the players are going to be taking damage. You really don't want this to happen because you only get 2 health in this game, but luckily you can defend from each type of element once. So if you are being attacked by an invader, you really want it to be a different element than one that you've been attacked with previously. But it's important to know that players will also lose the game if the token ever reaches the end of the invader track, but the players win if they're able to build those 4 towers and eliminate all 4 of those bosses. If this one sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on the 17th, we have Railroad Tiles, and this one is coming from the same publisher that created the series of games known as Railroad Inc., and this one is also a standalone sequel to those games. And these games do come from a publisher that's created some very popular games, so it's no surprise that this one is also our Discord pick of the week. And I think it's a good pick because this one's going to be offering quite a lot of depth with very little complexity. The game plays over 8 rounds, where at the start of each round you're going to be drawing tiles randomly from a bag and then putting them into these 5 different columns. The amount of tiles that go into a column is indicated on the board, And then players are just going to be taking turns drafting one of those columns into their supply. And of course, taking a column with more tiles normally is more valuable to you, but it does come at the cost, pushing you back in the turn order for the following round. But once all the players have taken their tiles, they're just going to be placing them out in front of them in order to create different networks. By joining the tracks with the tracks and the roads with the roads, you're going to be placing trains, cars, and people, and the options that you have are going to be determined by the tiles that you drafted, because each of the tiles could have different icons on them indicating this. But the thing you're trying to do here is to get the same types of pieces adjacent to each other, because you're going to be gaining points for any of those connections that you're able to make. You're going to be gaining those points throughout the game as you place those meeples, but you can also score points at the end of the game depending on the layout of your tiles, because each group of city tiles is going to be worth a certain amount of points. Then you're also going to be gaining points for creating big groups of tiles without any gaps. The player with the most victory points at the end of the 8 rounds wins the game. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also on the 17th, we have Cosmic Conquest, and this one is a dice rolling combat game where each player is going to be creating a team of 3 different characters, each with their own unique roles. Each character also has their own unique ability that you'll be able to use at different points in the game, but anytime that you do this, it will go into a cooldown that will last a certain amount of rounds. But on a turn, you can take 2 different actions, and the main actions in this game are either to move or to attack. You do have a few different options of the movement. You can either just move to an adjacent planet or move to a planet that you currently have under your control, or you can pay XP in order to move to any of the planets. But if you want to attack, you're going to be choosing a player that's on the same planet as you, and then both players are going to be rolling their dice, and you each do have 1 reroll if you want to use it. And then you can also play any cards that you have in order to modify your results or take additional bonus actions. Both players can take damage here, and it is resolved simultaneously, and you're going to be comparing the swords and shields on opposing sides in order to deal the damage to each player according to the difference there. But there are some reasons that you would rather be the attacker than the defender, and the first one is that the defender is more limited in the cards that they're able to use in a battle, and the defender does also have to play their cards first, which means that as the attacker you do have the advantage of seeing what your opponent does before you decide which cards you want to invest into the battle. Once you've completed your 2 actions and resolved any battles, you're then going to be checking each of the planets to see whether you have either conquered it or overthrown it. And you're able to conquer planets if you're the only one on that planet at this point, or you can conquer planets if it is currently in control by an opponent player. But in either of these cases, in order for them to actually happen, you do have to meet the criteria outlined on that planet, and each planet is going to have its own unique criteria that you're going to have to meet. Controlling planets is really nice because each one does come with a passive ability that you'll be able to take advantage of as long as you're in control of it. And then, like I said before, you can move freely to any planets that you currently control when you do take a movement action. The other reason that you want planets is because they are worth victory points at the end of the game, but you can also gain victory points from defeating your enemies or meeting different criteria along the way. The first player that reaches 20 points triggers the end of the game, but then there are some additional endgame scoring that can occur, and then the player with the most points at that point in the game wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked down below. And also launching on the 17th, we have Rayman the board game, and this one is a competitive racing game where players are trying to complete laps around the board, avoiding different traps and monsters while trying to collect 3 different colored tinsies, which are small fairy-like creatures that are going to be trapped in cages. The game uses a modular board with all sorts of different obstacles, and players are going to be using deck building and cards in order to take their actions to move around the board. Players do get to play as the different characters from the video game, but each of them do start with the same set of cards, so these differences are purely aesthetic at first, but players will be drafting cards at the start of each round in order to get different and more powerful cards into their deck, adding some more strategy as well as some more asymmetry. But the game plays over a series of rounds with each player choosing 2 cards from their hand simultaneously, and each of the cards is going to be determining the amount of movement that you get, ranging from 2 to 9 spaces, as well as any additional special abilities like jumping, crawling, flying, or even slapping enemies out of your way. The reason that the players do this simultaneously is because these cards also determine the initiative that you have for that round, which is going to affect your turn order. The player who has the highest initiative value is going to be the player that goes first, and then the movement is based on the cumulative values of the 2 cards that you picked. You'll be able to move that many spaces forward on the board if you're able to do so. But like I said, there will be all sorts of traps and obstacles and monsters that can slow you down, and there are also those tinsies in the cages that you are trying to acquire. This is where that jumping, crawling, flying, and slapping all come into play, because you're going to be using those in order to manipulate your position out on the board as you move forward, and also to potentially interact with any of those obstacles. Slapping a monster out of your way also allows you to draw a random action token, which you'll be able to hold on your own personal board here. And these action tokens essentially act like free actions that you'll be able to spend later in order to perform whatever that token indicates. Players can also slap their opponents in order to send them back a few spaces, but you can defend against this if you were able to collect any hearts. After all the players have had their turn, we move into the end of the round that you really do want to plan for, because it's at this point where there's going to be various missiles moving across the board. These, of course, are going to harm any of the players that get in their way, so you do want to plan to end your turn in a space that isn't going to be intercepted by a missile. But also, this is another opportunity to make even more use out of your slapping in this game, because if you're able to slap one of your opponents into the line of one of those missiles, then you're going to be getting a lot of value out of that slap. But the game continues like this until a player is able to collect those 3 different colored tinsies and then also complete their current lap and make it to the finish line. And if they're able to do that first, they win the game. And if you want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also on the 17th, we have Ice and Land, and this one is a competitive spin and write, where the goal is to get the most victory points, but also to survive 9 days out in the Arctic. The game plays over 9 rounds, with each round representing a day, but before you start the rounds, you are going to be drawing 5 cards and revealing 4 of them and keeping 1 face down, and these are the objectives that players are going to be competing for victory points at the end of the game. And the way that these come into play is that they're going to be randomly assigned one of the locations out on your map, and each player is going to be trying to explore as many of the spaces around that location as possible, because if you are the player that managed to explore the most spaces around an objective, then you're going to be scoring the most victory points from it at the end of the game. Each player does also start with a set amount of items, and the nice thing about this is that you can actually decide which items you want those to be, as long as you don't select any of the items that have this little star on them. The section on the left can kind of be thought as your resources or your energy, because you're going to be spending those to take various actions like moving around on the map. The section on the right represents your camp items, which you'll only have access to when you take a camp action, but these different items will allow you to do things like steal a resource from another player, just straight up gain victory points, collect a resource of your choice, or move to any new corner of the map. The center section is your inventory, which is the items that you'll just be able to use whenever it's appropriate, and these will allow you to do things like protect yourself from someone trying to steal a resource from you, protect yourself from landslides and move around them easier, or use a camp action instead of using an explore action. But the way that the actions work in this game is that the active player is going to be spinning this dial here, and then that's going to be determining the actions that players will have for that turn. The explore action allows each player to move 5 spaces through their map, and the different icons on the map represent the different types of terrain that you're going to be moving through. You're going to have to pay 1 resource for each unique type of terrain that you encounter. This means that it is more efficient to move through the same type of terrain, and the nice thing about doing this is that if you ever complete a section of a terrain, then you're also going to be gaining a resource. The next action is the landslide action, and every player is going to be passing their map to the player next to them, and then that player is going to be able to cross out any empty space, making it no longer accessible to that player, even potentially blocking off other areas. The next action is the camp action, which allows you to use any of those camp items that you were able to collect so far. And then there's the inventory action, which allows each player to gain a new item into their inventory. After all the players have had a turn, you're going to be moving into the end of round, where you're going to be drawing a number of hazard cards equal to the value indicated on the current round. These different hazards are going to be appearing on various locations out on the board, and your ability to defeat that hazard depends on how much of that area you've explored. Players do get to choose whether they want to face these hazards, and if they do and they're able to overcome them, then that's going to be gaining them some additional points at the end of the game, but if they don't succeed, then that's going to be costing them some of their resources. But the game continues like this over the 9 rounds, and the player with the most victory points at the end wins the game. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And also on the 17th, we have Secret Recipe, and this one's a competitive deduction game where each player only has a section of a secret recipe, but everyone's trying to complete their own, which means that they're going to have to deduce the missing components from all the other players. The way that this is represented in the game is at the start of the game, each player is going to be dealt 4 different ingredients that they're going to be keeping secret, representing their portion of the recipe, and then you're going to be trying to guess what all the other players have for their ingredients. On a player's turn, there's 2 types of guesses that they can make. They can either do an uncertain guess, which doesn't have a penalty associated with it if you guess incorrectly, but you only have a limited number of these, and they're also not going to be scoring you as much victory points as the certain guesses if you do happen to guess correctly. And the second type of guess is the certain guesses, and like I said, these will gain you more victory points if you are correct, but they do come with a greater penalty if you don't guess correctly. This is why it's good to try and gather as much information as you can before you make these guesses, and the way that you do that is on your turn you're going to be exchanging different tokens to the center of the board, and these are going to allow you to gain information from your various opponents, but it will also require you to reveal some information. Each of the clues is going to relate to a certain aspect of the ingredient, such as the type of ingredient it is, or maybe its weight and how it weighs compared to other ingredients. But the game continues like this until that recipe is completed, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And also launching on the 17th, we have Nature, and this one is a competitive game where players are trying to become the most dominant species. And this one is coming from the same publisher that created the games Oceans and Evolution, and this one does share a lot of similarities with those games, so if you are familiar with those, you will see those similarities here. I think this one will be my favorite of the 3. I wasn't a huge fan of Oceans, and then Evolutions never really compelled me enough to want to buy it, but after looking into this one, it is one that I am considering. And I'll just go ahead and back that up by saying that this one is my own personal pick of the week, and the reason for that is because this game looks like it offers a lot of depth without a whole lot of complexity. It looks like it does a lot with very few components, and this is a game that offers a lot of variety when it comes to comboing and making you feel like you've made some very clever plays. And another cool aspect of this game is that it is also a modular game. The way that this works is that you'll be able to include any combination of the unique decks in your game in order to create a unique permutation of those decks. I really like this because not only does it offer a ton of variability from game to game, but since you're actually going to be swapping out completely different decks with different themes, each game is actually going to feel very different from each other depending on the decks that you choose. Each of the decks are going to be adding their own set of traits into the game that players are going to be using to evolve their species in various ways, but each of these decks could also introduce mechanisms either by modifying some of the core rules, adding onto those rules with some new ideas like different ways to gather food, or even introducing additional boards or components. But like I said, the goal of this game is to become the most dominant species, and the way that you do that is, of course, by being the player that ate the most at the end of the game. Players could eat vegetation, meat, or both depending on how they evolve their animals, and there will be a shared watering hole that's going to be populated with a certain amount of vegetation each round that players are going to be competing for. Players start the game with just a level 1 species of only 1 population. You're going to be tracking the level of your species with this token here. Then you're going to be tracking the amount of the population with these different population tokens to the right of it. The game plays over 4 rounds, and at the start of each round, all the players do get to draw 5 more cards into their hand, and you do get to draw those cards from any of the decks that you are including in that game. Players will then take turns playing as many of those cards from their hand as they want to or that they're able to, and there's a few different things that you can do with these cards. You can either play them into your species in order to add those particular abilities and stats and icons to that species, or you can discard cards to either raise the level of your species or increase the population of your species. Just keep in mind for each population token that you're adding, you're going to have to pay for that token with additional food at the end of the round, or else you will lose that population. Any cards that you don't play do carry forward into the following round, so if there is something that you think will be more useful to hang on to for a future turn, you can just choose not to play it and hang on to it for a later time. There's a ton of different trait cards that you'll be able to mix together in different ways as you build up your species, but just keep in mind that each of your species is only allowed to have 3 trait cards. These cards can have all sorts of different abilities that can trigger at different points in the game, but they can also have these different icons which might go hand in hand with those abilities, or they might be used to attack or defend from other animals. This is because you can turn any of your animals into a carnivore as a free action on your turn, and whenever you do that, they're going to be starting to eat meat. One of the ways to get meat in this game is to eat the population of the other animals out on the table, and you are also able to eat your own if no other players have animals that you're able to capture. But in order to determine which of the prey you're able to catch, you're going to be combining your level with each of your predator stats, adding them up to your total strength, and then you'll compare that to each of the other animals' level added with each shell icon that they have within their species display. Any of the species' defense that totals less than your strength is going to be suitable prey for your animal. But players only feed their animals after all the players have played any cards that they want, and then when they do feed their animals, they're going to be going in turn order. As I said, any of the predator species are going to be eating any of the other animals at the table that are weaker than them, and you're going to be doing this for each population token that you have, assuming that there are enough animals there to eat. For the animals that eat plants, your primary source of food is going to be coming from the watering hole, but you're only allowed to take as many as your species level, plus any of the vegetation icons on your cards. But of course, you can only take food up to the amount of populations that you have to feed, and for each one that you are able to feed, you're going to be putting that food token on top of it. Any populations that go unfed will die and will be removed for the following round. And if a population ever gets to 0, either from not being fed or by other animals eating it, then that species will go extinct. Luckily, you do get a new species token each round to start a new species, and there are different actions that allow you to gain these as well, which means that you can have multiple species on the go. I should also mention that at the end of each round, you're going to be taking all the food tokens off of any of the populations that you're able to feed, and then you're just going to be hanging on to those as victory points at the end of the game, and the player who has the most after the 4 rounds is going to be the winner of the game. And if you do want to check this one out, you can find a link to it in the description down below, and of course, click to get notified. And also launching on the 17th, we have a brand new expansion for the game DinoGenics. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a worker placement game where players are competing to gain the most money and prestige by building their own dinosaur park. The new expansion is called the New Arrivals expansion, which is going to be introducing a bunch of new dinosaurs and buildings and ability cards into the game. But this is also introducing a rework to the core game as well as the previous expansion, and even combining them into a single board so that you have all the spaces for everything that you need in a single spot. A couple of the new changes to the rules with this one is that any of the cards that are not chosen for the various actions, rather than being discarded, are going to be going into the market instead, meaning that players will still have the opportunity to grab those. And there is also a new mechanism where players can actually train their workers in order to get a bonus anytime that you use them. But like I said, this is a worker placement game, and there's going to be a limited amount of spaces at each of the worker placement locations depending on player count. But these different locations can grant you with different actions like buying additional buildings, which you can use to grant more victory points or generate resources or allow for more visitors in your park. Or maybe you want to build fences in order to create the different areas within your park to hold the dinos. But in order to actually gain those dinos, there are a few different action location spaces that grant you dino DNA cards in different ways. And there's an action to gain goats in order to feed those dinos or gain money, or gain or play different special ability cards. And one thing to note with the different actions and special abilities in this game is that some of them can gain you scandal tokens, which act as negative victory points at the end of the game, but there is also an action space to get rid of those. But like I said, you're going to be using the Dino DNA cards in order to create your dinosaurs, and the way that that works is that you're going to be trying to create sets of these cards in order to trade them in for the actual Dino Meeple, which you'll be putting out onto your board. A few things to note about the dinos is that each of them will grant you a certain amount of victory points at the end of the game, but they also may have a number of goats that they need to eat each round, and also they'll each bring an amount of prestige to your park, which is going to equal more visitors, which equals more money. Some of the dinosaurs could have some special actions or rules or abilities that will also come to play in different ways, and each of them will require a certain size of pen and may have some restrictions as to what they can be placed with. You don't have to meet all the requirements of the dinosaur card in order to put that dino into your park, but whenever you're not able to or choose not to meet a certain requirement, you're going to have to roll some dice, which could end up causing some destruction in your park, or visitors possibly being eaten. There's also different event cards that can have all sorts of different effects on the game that are going to be triggering at the start of each round that players are going to want to keep aware of. But the game continues like this, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And also launching on the 17th, we have Epireia, and this one's a competitive game that plays over 3 different acts, with each of those acts providing their own specific objectives. I couldn't find a whole lot of info on this game, but each of the acts is broken down into 3 different phases, with the first phase being the development phase, where players are going to be constructing buildings and recruiting different military units. Then you're going to be going into the diplomacy phase, where you'll be able to take control over neutral territories out on the board, deploy your units, and colonize different territories, or even establish trade relations with the different empires on the perimeter of the board. The final phase is the production phase, where players are going to be resolving conflicts and negotiations, and then collecting their associated resources. The 3 acts continue like this, but then at the end of the final act, you're going to have a final confrontation. You're going to be placing your military units out on these various boards, and the player that comes out on top there, however that works, wins the game. And if you do want to learn more about the actual details of this game and how it actually plays, I will leave a link to the campaign in the description down below. I'm sure there'll be a bunch more information once this one actually launches. And also launching on the 17th, we have Isla, which is a competitive roll and write where players are going to be using dice in order to explore an island, and players are going to be racing to make certain discoveries and take all that information off the island back home first in order to score the most victory points. This is a campaign that I did actually cover a while back, but they've pulled it down to make some changes, and it's going to be relaunching now. So if you do want to learn more about this one, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And this one is a competitive roll and write of exploration where players are trying to leave an island, but trying to explore as much of it as possible before they leave, because there's lots of opportunity to gain victory points, and also you lose a victory point for every square that goes unexplored. But the way that this game works is that players can be rolling 5 different polyhedral dice at the start of the game, and then each round, each player is going to decide whether they want to rest, move, or research. If you choose to move, you're going to be picking one of your dice and gaining movement points equal to the value of that die, and then you'll be able to move across your board that many times. The catch here is that whenever you use a die, it gets discarded and you're no longer able to use that die until you perform the rest action. Because when you choose that action, you'll be able to take the lowest value die that you rolled that has previously been discarded and then add it back into your supply. This means that you'll want to be strategic with the timing of the dice you use and when you perform that rest action to make sure you're getting back the die that gives you the most benefit. But players will be trying to move on to different locations that have different tiles on them that you'll be able to research in order to get certain victory points if you're able to complete certain sets. And that's exactly what the research action is for, because once you get the tokens that you need, you can perform the research action to get the associated victory points. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. Also on the 17th, we have COSCA take over the Mafia, and this one looks like a really interesting competitive card game that plays over 7 rounds. And the way that this game works is that the game's going to be set up with 2 rows of cards. The top row are the various location cards, which are going to be granting players with different actions. Then the bottom row is all the different mafiosos that players can gain loyalty with in order to score victory points throughout the game. And you might have noticed that each of these cards have all sorts of different icons on them, and this is the key to gaining access to those cards, because at the start of each round, each player is going to be taking their dice behind their player's screen and selecting which of their icons they would like to be face up for that round. After all the players have done that, you're going to be revealing your selections, and then each of these location cards are going to be resolving from left to right, granting an action to each of the players that selected that icon on any of their dice. And if you did select that icon multiple times, you are allowed to take that action that many times. The different actions will normally allow you to do things like gain or exchange different types of tokens, but some of them do have some special abilities as well, like granting an extra die for a following round, or placing a money token onto one of your loyal mafiosos. After all the location cards have been resolved, all the players are going to be checking if any of their combinations of dice match any of the combinations on any of the mafiosos cards. For each match that you have, you're going to be taking one of your hat tokens and then putting it above that card. And if you're the only one to put a hat token above that card, then you will just automatically put it onto that card. But if there's other players' hats there as well, then you're going to be going into a blind bidding some of your tokens in order to win the loyalty of that mafioso. In either of those cases, if there was already a hat token on that card, it simply returns to the player who it belonged to, unless they were able to place a money token on that card. And if that's the case, then they're going to be also taking part in that blind bidding, fighting to retain the loyalty of that mafioso. But the game continues like this over those 7 rounds, and the player with the most victory points at the end wins the game. If you want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. Also launching on the 17th, we have Dungeons of the Oak Dell, and this is coming from the same team that brought you the game Villagers of the Oak Dell, and both of these are roll and write games, but they do play very different from each other. They both look like a ton of fun, so definitely check this one out if you are a fan of roll and writes. And I am excited to show you this one because the publisher was nice enough to send me a copy, which I do have set up here in front of me. And yes, they do have some pretty cool components here with a sword marker as well as a shield that you'll be using to help draw straight lines, which I'll come back to in a minute here. And I should mention that these are prototype components, and what you'll end up with the final version of the game will look a little bit different than these. And although these do look really cool, the final version will look even better. And I have this game set up for 2 players, and each player is going to be taking a player sheet, which they're going to be using to track their health and items. And then each player is also going to be taking a dungeon sheet, which they're going to be tracking their progress through the dungeon. On the left here, we have a bunch of different monsters that players will be encountering throughout the dungeon. And at the start of the game, each player is going to be drawing a level 1 monster from the level 1 stack, and then taking that into their supply. And just because of my limited space here, I'm just going to show what I have in front of me, and you can just assume that there is a second player here. And now that I have this monster out in front of me, it does allow me to attack that monster, but it can also allow that monster to attack me. And this is one of my favorite aspects of this game because I think this is a really cool mechanism, and I'll come back to it after I explain how the action selection works. And for that, we're going to be using this action board way up here. And the way this works is that one of the players is going to be rolling all of the dice, and then you're going to be assigning them to their respective locations by matching up their colors and numbers. Each die corresponds to the section it's adjacent to, and the outer perimeter here indicates how many movement points you get to spend on your turn if you draft that die. And then the inside location here with all the different shapes and colors is going to be matching the different shapes and colors on your monster sheet. You might also notice that the monster sheet has a black die and a white die outlined in the bottom right here, and this correlates to the amount of damage that the monster can do depending on the die that you drafted. Normally you'll find that the black dice put you in more danger, but they also are the dice that can grant you more movement points. Collecting the different potions will allow you to check those off on your inventory sheet, gaining you access to those potions that you can use later, and the potions can do different things, like increase the amount of damage you do to an enemy, decrease the amount of damage it does to you, or make additional strikes against the enemy. There's also these different locations that have torches on the wall, and if you're able to end your movement next to one of those torches, that's going to allow you to reduce the value of your die by 2 when it comes to the enemy attacking you. Taking a look in the bottom right corner of the monster card, you can see that the amount of damage that the enemy is going to do to you is determined by not only the color of the die, but also the value of the die that you drafted, with 5 to 6 giving you either 2 or 3 damage in this case, and then 3 and 4 giving you either 1 or 2 damage. Since the torch lets you reduce that by 2, it's going to be taking it down one of those levels. There's also some torches that are just laying around in the dungeon that you can pick up anytime that you move through them. And when you do this, you're going to be marking it on your player sheet in order to keep track of that. And these work exactly like the torches on the wall. The only difference here is that you get to carry them along with you and use them whenever you want. You might have also noticed that some of the spaces do have a chest in them, and these are normally locked behind a door, but if you're able to get the key and get to that chest, this is going to allow you to circle one of the pieces of gear on your inventory sheet, which will gain you access to that special upgrade. Of course, a dungeon wouldn't be a dungeon without some traps as well, and that's what these different spikes represent. And anytime that a player moves through those spikes, you're going to be taking as much damage as the current level of the dungeon that you're in. The different levels are represented by the different type of flooring that you'll find in the dungeon, and there is a legend at the bottom of the sheet that will let you know exactly which type of flooring correlates to which level of dungeon. One thing to note about the traps is that there is a sneaky way that you can get around them, and the way that you do this is by using all your movement points for that turn, but then end your movement on a trap, and that's going to allow you to stop on it without triggering it, and then you'll be able to move from that location safely in your following turn. But I think that gives you a good enough idea of the base rules here for me to start taking my turn, And for my first action, I'm going to go ahead and draft this black 4 die because it does give me 4 movement. And then it will allow me to start attacking the enemy starting from the green triangle, which I'll explain in a second here. Since that gave me 4 movement, I'm going to be moving through here and ending my movement on a trap, which will allow me to move through it safely, like I mentioned before. But it did also get me a potion as well, which I can use at some point in the future. But now that I've completed my movement, I can go ahead into the attack phase where I'm going to be attacking the monster. And since I drafted a die from a space that has a green triangle, this is going to allow me to land a blow on the enemy potentially by drawing a line starting at any of the green triangles. I can connect to any other icon that I want to, I just have to start from a green triangle, and in order to actually deal damage to the enemy, the line does need to cross over the enemy at some point on its body. You might have also noticed these other icons next to the monster, and if you're able to also cross the line through any of those, that's going to allow you to gain that item or upgrade. And I should mention that when you are deciding which other icon to connect to, you're not allowed to double check with your ruler to see if you're actually going to be hitting the monster or if you're going to be hitting one of those icons that you're aiming for. You just have to use your eyes and use your best judgment. And once you make your decision, you have to stick with it even if it didn't land the way that you expected. That being said, there is a potion that does allow you to check any of the lines before you draw them, but I don't have that potion at this point in time, so I'm just going to go ahead and start from this green triangle up here, and then I'm going to connect to this red icon over here. Now that I've committed to that, I can go ahead and put my ruler on there and draw my straight line, which does hit the monster, and it also hits this icon. Because the icon I crossed through matched this icon in the center here, it's going to allow me to move up this skill track. And these skill tracks are nice because any icons that connect to any of the spaces that you've unlocked are now available for you to use at any point in the future. Because the one I just circled is connected to a torch, that means I can go ahead and use that torch at any point in the future by crossing it out on the sheet here. And I'll just give you a closer look at the monster sheet now that I've crossed the line through it. And I should mention that I haven't successfully done any damage to the monster yet because crossing a line through it does not deal damage. In order to actually deal damage, you need to create intersection points on the monster, which means that I need to draw a second line, and it also needs to intersect the line I just drew, and it also needs to intersect on top of the monster. Now that I've done all I want to attack this monster, the monster is now going to retaliate and attack me. And since I drew a black die with a value 4, it means that the monster is going to be doing 2 damage against me. But since I did just unlock that torch icon, I can just go ahead and use it, which is going to allow me to treat my die as if it's reduced by a value of 2. And now the monster is just going to do 1 damage to me, and I mark that by just crossing off one of those broken hearts underneath the health track there. And the way that the health track works is that the number of colored hearts indicates your total health. And once you catch up to that by crossing out that many broken hearts, then that means you've lost all your health. Your max health can be increased in order to try and avoid that, but if your health does go down to 0, you'll have to skip the movement action on your turn in order to gain 2 health back. And a really nice thing about this game is that turns are simultaneous, and as soon as I drafted my die during my previous turn, my opponent would have drafted their die immediately afterwards and then taken all their actions as I was performing mine. But now we both get to draft our second die, so I'm going to say that I pick this one and they may have picked that one. And this one's going to allow me to move 2 movement points, so I'm going to move through this torch that I'm able to collect. And I should probably show you what I'm doing, so I'll drag this up here and I'll actually move this a little bit closer to the camera so you can see exactly what I just did. And the die drafted was next to another green triangle, which isn't the best option for me, but I guess I'll start at this one and end at the blue. So let's draw that line, which does move me through another icon, which I can check off here, which gains me an extra health. And as a nice bonus, we do now have an intersection point on top of the enemy, which will deal damage to them. So they're going to be getting 1 point of health taken away. Then the enemy is going to do damage to me, and then me and my opponent are going to draft 1 more die and do that sequence over again. And once all the players have drafted their 3rd die and completed their actions for that turn, that's going to be triggering the end of the round, where all the dice are going to be collected and rolled again, and then set out on the board in order to start the next round. But the game continues like this with players moving through the dungeon, gaining all sorts of different items and gear, and then attacking their enemies. And when you do bring an enemy's health all the way down to 0, you're going to get the reward outlined in the bottom left here, and then you'll be discarding that and replacing it with a new monster, and the level of monster you draw is determined by your current location within the dungeon and which level that space corresponds with. If you end up using up all the different icons around the monster and you still haven't defeated them, then instead the monster is going to run away and you're not going to be getting the bonuses from that card, but you still do draw a new monster in its place. The way that you win the game is by completing the objective of your chosen scenario, and there's 2 different scenarios offered in the prototype that I have here. The first one, and the one that I'm playing with right now, requires you to visit the 3 shrines marked with these stars, and then trade in the appropriate stat there in order to destroy that shrine. The first player to destroy all 3 shrines wins the game. The other scenario comes with a different dungeon card, and the way that you defeat this one is by reaching the boss's chamber, which is marked with a star here as well. And once you've reached that location and you've defeated the current monster that you're facing, then instead of drawing any of the other monster cards, you're going to be drawing a boss monster. And to win that scenario, you need to be the first player to defeat your boss. I really like this game, and it plays very different from any other roll and write that I've ever played, which is a breath of fresh air, because I do find that a lot of roll and writes do feel a little bit samey. So if you are a fan of roll and writes, or if the game just looks like a lot of fun to you, I do recommend checking this one out because it might be bringing something a little bit different to your table. I did also mention that this is their second roll and write, and their first one was called Villagers of Oak Dell, and I did cover that one back when it previously launched, and I do expect that you will be able to get it either during this campaign or during the Pledge Manager. So if you are interested to know what their other roll and write plays like, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And of course, I do have this link down below if you do want to click to get notified. And the game plays over 12 rounds, but each round you're going to be rolling a pool of dice. And there's going to be dice of a few different colors, with each of the colors being associated with a certain quadrant on the action track. Each of the quadrants are also broken down into smaller segments, with each of those segments being associated with a different value of the die, and of course offering you different actions to choose from. But what most of these actions are going to do is grant you resources that you'll then be able to cross out on your own personal player sheet. There's a bunch of different resources you can gain. There's the pickaxe that allows you to fill in different cells within the mine section, which will grant you victory points for filling in different rows and columns. And of course, there are certain areas that will grant you other resources. So there is a cascading effect that can happen, because when you fill that in, you'll be able to gain access to that other resource, which can allow you to fill in more cells on the sheet. And this concept does exist in other areas you'll be filling in as well. The wood resource allows you to expand your town, but then also to build buildings around the perimeter of your board. And the nice thing about building these is that building production is going to be triggered on certain rounds throughout the game, which means that the more buildings you have built earlier, the more benefit you'll get from them over the entirety of the game. But there is one more thing you have to do in order to build your buildings, and that's to unlock those building locations. And in order to do this, you'll be using the roads resource, which will allow you to fill in different paths along the road, reaching these different flags which represent the building locations. But then you'll also be gaining any bonuses from icons that you're able to reach, as well as bonuses for surrounding complete sections of the land. And the last resource we have is an interesting one, because this one is actually the villager resource. And this one can be used in one of 2 ways. It can either be used as a worker or as a knight. If you're going to be using it as a worker, you're going to be filling in one of these villager spaces. At the end of the round, you're going to be moving up this track equal to the number of the workers that you have filled in that row. But the nice thing about this is that those workers go to work every single round. So if you fill in all 3 of those, you're going to be moving up 3 points on that track every single round. And you can probably see that you'll probably end up maxing out that track pretty quickly if you do get 3 workers there. But if that's the case, you're actually going to be earning gold for each space that you can't move up that track, which is going to earn you victory points at the end of the game. One thing to note here is that each of these rows are also associated with a different color die, and they're only going to be activated when that associated die is chosen for that round. So even if you fill up one of your rows with 3 different workers, if you don't choose that die, that track is not going to move up. But now let's get over to how the knights work, which are going to be protecting you from attacks throughout the game, which if they go unprotected will give you negative victory points at the end of the game, because anytime that a 1 is rolled on any of the 4 die, it's going to be causing an attack to all of the players, and to indicate that, you're going to be filling in the sword icon at the top of the board. But if you spend one of your villagers as a knight, you'll be able to fill in the next knight on that bottom row, and anytime that your knights are ahead of the swords, that means that you're completely defending against all of the existing attacks. But the game essentially continues like this, with players rolling their dice and then using those dice to perform various actions out on their sheets. And like I said, there'll be a ton of cascading effects, and there will also be some objective cards that players will be trying to complete throughout the game as well, which will kind of change your strategy from game to game. And those do grant you additional victory points if you are able to complete them. So if this one does sound interesting to you, you can definitely check it out. I have it linked in the description below. And of course, you can click to get notified. Also on the 17th, we have Tameri, and this is one that I just found out about, so I didn't get a chance to look into this one in too much detail, but I did take a quick look at their campaign page. And this one is a worker placement game that has a unique mechanism with a pyramid where you're going to be putting marbles in the top, and then those marbles are going to be coming out of the sides, and depending on where they show up and which colors they are, that's going to be determining which fields are going to be growing the crops for that season. The game combines tableau building with worker placement as well as resource management, and players are going to be using action cards in order to take their various actions. And what's cool about these cards is that they do have different icons printed on the edge of them, and if the card that you previously played connects with the one that you're about to play in order to form the completed icon, then you actually get to take both of those actions. I don't have much more info on this one, but it does look interesting to me, and I will be looking more into it. But Rado does have a video out for this one already that I haven't had a chance to watch yet, but I will be watching it a bit later. And if you want to learn more about this game, you can go ahead and check out his video, and you can find it on the campaign, which you can find a link to in the description down below. And we still have more campaigns launching on the 17th, and the next one is 3 new expansions to the game, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, but you will also be able to get all the previous content for this game through this campaign as well. But these new expansions are going to be adding 3 new factions into the game. There's going to be the Stronghold, the Conflux, and the Cove, and each of these are going to be coming with their own set of tiles, miniatures, cards, as well as additional components and boards. And yes, this is based on the video game with the same name, but this board game is going to be a scenario-based game where you're going to be choosing a scenario and then setting up the board and terrain tiles according to that scenario. Players are going to be able to choose a faction as well as a faction leader. And the way this game works is that players are going to be exploring the main board, visiting the different locations, and performing the different actions that are associated with them. These can give you different benefits, but most of these locations depict some numbers on it that will indicate the type and level of enemies that you'll have to fight in order to perform the action that is located there. But battles don't happen on the main board. Instead, you're going to be moving them over to the battle board. And each player is going to have their own personal battle board that they're managing throughout the game, and you'll be able to gain and spend tokens to recruit different units. And there's a few different types of units. There's your ground units, your flying units, and your ranged units. And the difference between them is that they're going to have different movement as well as different attack ranges. You'll also be able to spend tokens to gain different magic attack cards that give you some special attacks that you can use against your enemies. And then there's other tokens that you can spend to gain different building cards, and if you pay the resources to build that building, it can give you some special effects like a special ability or some resource generation that gets triggered at the start of each round. But when you actually go into battle, you're going to be setting up the enemy battle board according to the enemy units that were drawn, and then you're going to be sliding that board along with your board in order to start that battle. And all the units involved in the battle are going to trigger an initiative order, and in order to attack, you're going to be playing any cards from your hand as well as rolling a die to modify that attack value. And you'll be able to gain experience points for defeating any enemies, but any enemies that you're not able to defeat will retaliate and perform a counterattack. And of course, once all the characters on one side or the other are defeated, then that would trigger the end of the battle. And once all the players have performed their actions, you're going to be moving into the following round, and a couple things can happen at the start of each round. A special event can happen that can affect all players positively or negatively, but then also players can generate resources from their resource generation engine that they were able to build up throughout the game so far. And the game will be offering scenarios for cooperative, competitive, and solo play. And if you want to know more about this one, I have links in the description below. And also on the 17th, we have Emberleaf, which is the next game from the City of Games, which is also the same team that brought you the game The Isle of Cats, which is a game that I have kept in my collection. Emberleaf plays very different from any of their previously released games, but I still do think this one looks really, really well designed, and I'm really interested to learn more about this one. And for that reason, this one is also my own personal pick of the week. But this is a game that offers a little bit of deck building, but it does it in a very unique way because any of the cards that you play they don't actually get discarded. Instead, they just go into play, and then once they cycle out of play, they're going to be going directly back into your hand. You're going to be using those cards to take all sorts of different actions, collect resources, and build buildings out on the main board, and also clear various threats that you might encounter out on this board. This is the main board that's in the center of the table that all the players are going to be using, but then each player is going to have their own personal board where they're going to be engaging in a mechanism known as card dancing. The way this works is that you're going to be playing cards onto this board, and there's 8 different slots where you can play your cards, but these 2 on the right here are blocked until you're able to build those buildings and remove them from the board, which will then make those spaces available to you. But like I said, on your turn you're going to be playing cards into these various locations, and each of your cards can have a couple different actions on them which can allow you to do different things like trade resources for other resources, gather resources based on the icons that are currently in play. For example, this card allows you to gather one of a particular resource for each of these pink turnips that are in play, and I can see 4 that are in play on the various cards right now. So the timing really does matter when you play these cards because you're going to want to try and trigger those actions when there's as many of those icons as possible. One thing to note is that you do have a limit to the number of resources that you're able to carry at once, and that's indicated by the 8 different spaces in the top right corner of your board, but you can expand that if you are able to build this blue building here, which will open up more slots for you to store even more resources. But more importantly, you'll want to spend those resources, and one way that you can do that is by performing a build action, and every time you place a building, you're going to be scoring victory points based on the number of different types of buildings connected to the one that you just placed. You're going to be building it in one of these regions out on the main board, but the more diverse that your connections are between the different buildings, the more points you're going to score. And there are some actions that allow you to either walk or travel to different areas of the board, but like I said before, some of the areas are dangerous to travel through. And this is where the attack actions come into play, and some of these actions might just allow you to deal a certain amount of damage, while others might scale depending on a particular icon available in your tableau. But there's going to be different dangers appearing out on the main board, and clearing those areas offers you a few different benefits. First of all, it makes moving between those areas a lot easier, and it also rewards you with resources and does earn you victory points. But the thing about these different actions and what makes them so fun is that they're only going to get triggered when you perform a certain action with that card. And there are a few different actions that you can perform on your turn, and the first one is to place a card into your tableau. And whenever you do that and the card has a lightning bolt action on it, then that lightning bolt action is going to get triggered, allowing you to perform that action as well. Your other option is to perform a slide action, and this is going to slide all the cards currently out on your board one space to the left. And then any of the actions on the cards that have this arrow pointing to the left are then going to get activated. Something that's really cool about performing the slide is that when a card slides off the board, it's going to be coming back into your hand, and some of the cards do have this return trigger so that when that happens, it's going to be triggering the action associated with that icon. So you can kind of see how there's 2 layers of actions at play here. There's the actions that you're playing with your cards by either putting them into play or sliding them and having them come off the board back to you, with each of those 3 different events potentially triggering other actions that you can perform on your turn. There are also some special cards that can just trigger on various actions like spending or collecting a certain resource, or they might trigger whenever you want, but just a limited number of times. There are also some icons printed out on the board, and if those are visible, they work exactly like the icons on the cards. And then there's also some spaces that have actions on them, and at any time that you play a card onto one of those spaces, you have the choice to either activate the placement action of your card, or instead activate the action of the space that you've just placed it on. And this can be particularly useful if the card that you placed didn't have a placement action. I think you really will start to feel a rhythm here, trying to make certain things trigger in a particular order, so it makes a lot of sense that they do call this whole sequence of events card dancing. I'm really interested in this one, and I'll definitely be trying it out the first time I get a chance, and if it looks interesting to you as well, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And another game that I just found out about and I didn't get to look into too deeply is Hunted the North Pole, but luckily I did cover the previous Hunted games in the past, so I will go ahead and roll that previous footage for you. It looks like this one's going to be offering a similar style of game, but with a Christmas theme, and if you are interested to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. But I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a solo game in the Hunted series that also incorporates dexterity elements. And the way that this game works is that there's going to be a deck of cards that players are drawing from, and you're going to be drawing different things like items, survivors, and corridors, and each of those will come with a cost that if you want to purchase them, you need to pay that cost in order to take it into your hand. The way that you pay that cost is by matching the icons to other cards that you also drew, because every time you draw a card, it's going to be going into this row that is expanding until you either decide to rest or until you win or lose the game. But when you do purchase one of the cards, you're going to be taking that into your hand, and then the cards that you use to pay for it are going to be discarded. The actions will grant you with one-time use ability cards, whereas the survivors will act as a permanent ability, usually allowing you to have free access to a certain icon that you can use for paying for those various costs. And then the corridors are required in order to draw a location from the location deck, which is the main thing that you're trying to do in this game, because once you get through that entire deck and survive, then you win the game. The catch here is that each of those location cards will have an effect when they are visible, and they're normally not very good for the player. But aside from the items, survivors, and corridors, there's also enemy cards that you can draw from that main deck. And whenever they come out, they're not necessarily going to attack you right away, because they only attack you if there are 2 enemy cards or if there are 2 noise icons. And the noise icons are going to be appearing on those various items, which means that you might want to purchase an item just to get those items out of the row in order to try and put yourself in a better position if an enemy does show. The enemies can come with a different amount of strength and also have different effects on the player as well. But like I said, if you do have an enemy in your row that you really don't want to deal with and you haven't been forced into battle yet, you can always rest in order to clear that entire row of cards, losing any of those items, but also gain rid of the enemies as well. The catch here is that doing that also progresses the time track, and there's other actions that can progress it as well, but if you ever run out of time, that is another way that you can lose the game. As I said, this is the second edition of the game, and it does introduce a few changes, and a couple of those do affect the way that combat works. And like I said, this does incorporate dexterity elements, but one of the new changes is that it is going to be offering you a way to play this without dexterity, if that's something that you're not a huge fan of. But if you choose to fight using the dexterity element, the way this works is that you're going to have this card in the box of the game, and then you're going to be choosing how much ammunition you want to use from one of your weapons, and you always do start with a base weapon, and then you're going to be taking those associated tokens and then tossing them into the box, trying to get them to touch or be in the circle on your enemy. Anytime you do that, it counts as a hit, and if you can deal enough damage, then you will wipe that enemy from the row. But of course, the enemies will also be dealing damage back at you, especially if you're not able to defeat them, and anytime that happens, you're going to be losing health, and if you run out of health, that's another way to lose the game. But this new version of the game also introduces a damaged element where you'll be drawing a damaged card, and then that's going to be adding something to make the combat or some aspect of the game more difficult until you are able to heal. The new version also introduces an event deck and a new test system that's going to be improving the overall pace of the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can go ahead and check it out, and I'll have it linked in the description down below. It looks like there's a couple games here that I just found out about, because the next one is also launching on the 17th, and this one is called Trust Me, and this is the first time that I'm seeing this game, so I don't have much info on this one, but it looks like a bluffing game. And it looks like they have a bit of a description on here where players are going to have 1 day and 1 night to grow their reputation and gain tickets by gaining the trust of their opponents or by tricking them. The player with the most valuable tickets at the end of the game is the coolest kid in the group. On your turn, you must do both of the following steps in order. Draw 1 character from the character deck and place it into your hand. Perform one of the following 3 actions. Tell a tale, use reputation to gain a ticket, or use a character from the park. To tell a tale, you place 1 character from your hand face down below any character in the park. You're telling a true tale if the characters match, and you're bluffing if the characters don't match. Honest players who are not trusted will get both cards and then play a second round, while bluffing players who are trusted will get both cards and a precious ticket. But if you're caught lying, you get nothing. Cards gained during your turn go into your reputation, which can be discarded to redeem more tickets. As the game progresses, your reputation gets bigger and the bluffing will become much more tricky. At the end of the game, the player with the most victory points wins the game. Sorry I don't have more info on this one, but if you do want to check it out, I will have it linked in the description below. And this next one I did know about, but I just couldn't find that much information on it, so this is another one that you might have to check out the campaign to understand truly how it plays. But this one is called Aspens, and this one is a 2-player game. The way that this game works is that on your turn, you're going to be rolling a sun die, and then the value of that die is going to dictate which trees are tall enough to capture that sunlight. Both players will then gain additional trees for each of their spaces that meet that criteria, and then the wind die is going to be rolled. This is going to dictate the direction of the wind, which also dictates the direction that players can expand their forests. The active player can then place additional trees in that direction from their existing ones, but they can also choose to instead spend those trees in order to grow their existing trees taller. This is going to allow more of your trees to capture light when the sun die rolls a value that only allows the tall trees to capture that light. But when that die allows for a lower requirement on the height of your trees, having more trees is the optimal choice here. But that's pretty much all I know about this game so far, so if you do want to learn more, you can go ahead and check out the campaign, and I'll have that linked in the description down below. And launching on the 18th, we have Escape Masters, which is a real-time card shedding game where players are racing to get rid of all their cards first. Each player is dealt a hand of cards at the start of the game, and there's no turn order here. Players just need to play as quickly as possible to get rid of all their cards first, and the way that you're doing that is by playing those cards into various stacks, playing a value that is one value higher or one value lower than the card that is currently on top of that stack. The game starts with no stacks of cards out on the table, and the only way that you can start a stack is by playing one of the 7 cards. After that, you or another player could race to try and play either an 8 or a 6 on top of one of those cards. And the game kind of continues like that, except there are a few ways that you can actually get rid of multiple cards at once. First way is that if you have 2 face cards of the same value, you can actually stack them together as if they're a single card and play them out to any appropriate stack. The other way is that lower valued cards of the same suit can actually be played together as long as they add to the value that you need. So for example, if the stack currently had a value of 4 on it, you could go ahead and play a 1 and a 2 together as long as they are the same suit, and those add together to a 3, which is a valid card to play on that stack. There are also some special cards that players can play at any time, like the dead end cards that players can use to just kill a stack. So once a stack seems like it's no longer useful to you and you don't want other players to have access to it, you can just play this card on top of that stack to basically remove it from the game. There's also the trap cards that you can play to other players, which limits the options that they have when playing a card until they're able to get rid of that. And there are a few other special cards that allow you to do that or do other things. And the first player to get rid of all their cards wins the game. And if you do want to learn more about this one, I will have it linked down below. And now launching on the 19th, we have The Way, and this one is a campaign that I did cover a couple weeks ago, but it got postponed until now, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is a competitive game where players are each going to have 10 different tiles matching their color out on the main board at the beginning of the game. And the goal of the game is to be the first player to collect all of your tiles. What's really interesting about all this is that players are going to be drafting cards and playing them in order to move their pawn around on that board and collect those various tiles. And the way that this works is that there's going to be a bunch of cards at the bottom of the board here, and they're all going to be in stacks of 2. And then players are just going to be taking turns drafting one of those stacks of cards, putting one of the cards in front of them, and then one of the cards at the top of the board. The important thing to note here is that these cards do come in various colors, but the only 2 colors that really matter for that round are the 2 colors that are going to be outlined on this round card on the side of the board. If the card that you put in front of you matches one of those 2 colors, and then that same color has the highest sum of numbers out at the top of the board at the end of the round, then you're going to be gaining the amount of movement points equal to those cards. Of course, since all the players are contributing cards to that top row, you're going to have to anticipate what you think the other players are going to do. But the nice thing here is that even if you end up with cards that don't seem all that useful on the surface, Each of those hexes that you were able to collect so far do have a special ability associated with them, and you'll be able to spend those to activate their ability, which has a whole variety of effects that allow you to manipulate these cards out on the table or the cards in front of you in various ways. The first player to collect all their tiles wins the game, and if you are interested in this one, you can go ahead and check it out. I'll have it linked down below. Also on the 19th, we have Power City Arena, which is a deck building game where players are going to be controlling a team of superheroes, and each of the different characters will have their own set of unique abilities. And on a turn, you're going to be drawing cards and then spending those cards to gain actions in order to do things like move around onto different locations out on the board, attack other players, steal cards from them, or gain power, which can be spent to use your various abilities. This is a game that incorporates a little bit of strategy as you move around out on the board, with a bit of take that when you're using those various cards from your hand. There are some cards that you can play out of turn to protect yourself when another player attacks you, but this is another game that I didn't get to look into too deeply, so if you do want to learn more, I will have it linked down below. And we have another campaign that I just found out about right now, and I haven't seen this one before, but this one is also launching on the 19th, and this one is called Positano. You can always tell when a picture is taken in Italy if all the houses in the background are all different colors. But this one is a bidding and drafting game where players are going to be simultaneously choosing and revealing 2 bid cards at the start of each round. And then based on the bids, players are going to be drafting tiles from the bid board, and the tiles determine where on the cliffside you can build on your turn. And this part actually sounds really cool because players are going to be building their houses competing for those seaside views. So this is where a 3-dimensional board comes into play, because players are going to be building their houses upward in order to try and see above the houses in front of them and potentially block the houses behind them. Players are going to be scoring for having the highest quality buildings with the clearest view out to sea. But you'll also gain additional points for collecting gelato and capitalizing on goal cards. I actually think this one looks pretty cool. It's definitely going to be a very low complexity game, but it might possibly offer a fair bit of depth. I can't quite tell just by checking out the campaign, so I probably will watch a few of these videos here, and I will follow along with the campaign as well. I do like the theme a lot, and I don't have any Italian games in my collection yet, which is a shame because I am half Italian. But if you want to check it out, you can find the link in the description below. And that's finally everything I have for you this week. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know how many cups of coffee it took you to get through this whole thing. But I guess I probably shouldn't speak too soon because we're not quite done yet, because we do have an awesome giveaway to announce, and this one is going to be for a pledge for the Gems of Iridescia. And this is a competitive game where all the players are going to be starting at the bottom of the board, and then they're going to be using their actions in order to move up the board and mine different gems that they find along the way. A neat aspect here is that in order to mine additional gems, you're going to be rolling dice and trying to roll a value higher than the die that's currently out on display that matches the color of that gem. This means that a lower value die out on display makes collecting those gems a lot easier, but every time a gem is revealed, it's going to be increasing the value of that die by 1, which isn't an absolutely terrible thing because these dice also represent the current market value of those gems. This means that although you want to try and mine those gems when the dice are of a low value, you want to try and sell them when they are of a high value, so timing is everything here. The players can use that money to buy all sorts of items to help them along the way, including additional pickaxes which they can use to mine even more gems. The catch here is that you do also need those gems to complete different objective cards that players will be racing to try and complete. That is how players will be scoring victory points in this game, so it is a really important thing to make sure you're doing. And also you can only hold so many gems, so you do want to be spending them in one form or another. But like I said, players are going to be moving up the board, collecting those gems and selling them or trading them in to complete those objective cards. But the players that make it to the top of the board first are going to be gaining some nice additional bonus points, so you don't want to find yourself too far behind the other players. And I do want to thank the publisher here because they did donate an all-in pledge, so whoever wins this pledge is going to be getting everything offered in this game. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I should mention that this giveaway is only offered in North America, so if you are in North America, feel free to enter in on this giveaway. And to do that, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag gem, and you can say anything that you want, but if you are looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know what your favorite gem or stone is. And if you're not in North America, you can still feel free to let us know. Just don't put the hashtag in it because you won't be eligible for the draw. As For myself, I don't really know much about precious stones or gems, but I did go to an amber museum once and I thought that was pretty cool, so I guess I'll go with amber. I actually don't even know what my birthstone is, but I always did think it was kind of funny that some months actually have 2 birthstones because people do like to try and buy their birthstone, but some of the stones originally are just way too rare to find, so they ended up adding a second gemstone for that month so that people can actually find it. Good luck in the giveaway, but now let's go ahead and draw the winner for last week's giveaway, which was for a pledge for Quest Kids and all of its expansions. And to draw a winner here, I use this application. I'm actually only going to be drawing from the YouTube comments for this one rather than also pulling from my Ko-fi. And the reason for that is just because this is a kids game. I want to make sure that this actually goes to someone who consciously entered in the giveaway who knows that they can actually play it with their kids. So let's go ahead and do that and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner of Quest Kids is Nicholas Brule 6997, and I am happy to see that you have a little baby future gamer in your image there. I hope you and your family like the game. Thanks for joining in on the fun here. Just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that pledge all sorted out for you. And that is it for this week. I hope there's something there that caught your interest. There's definitely a few that I'll be checking out. I was interested in a couple of the games offered in the Ludos Africa campaign. DinoGenics is one that I've always wanted to try, but I do already own Dinosaur Island. COSCA Take Over the Mafia also has my attention, which was a bit of a surprise. I think the chaining of the cards looks really, really fun, but it's definitely one that I would want to try before I buy. Dungeons of the Oak Dell, which I still have set up right here. Definitely a really solid game. I think a lot of people will like this one. I really liked it as well. I just would like to get a few more plays in. I am also someone who does like a little more player interaction, so I'm not sure where exactly this one will sit for me. Tameri looks really cool, but I also don't know anything about it, so I will have to watch Rado's video on that one before I make any decisions. Railroad Ties is another one that I think looks really solid. I really do like the simplicity of it. But I am a little worried that it will feel a little bit samey after a while and that there maybe isn't quite enough variability from game to game. I'll probably check out some playthroughs or reviews from other content creators to see what they thought about that one. I really do like that card dancing mechanism in Emberleaf. That looks like a really fun puzzle to play around with. I am interested to learn about the main board and the interactions there because, like I said, I do enjoy games that have a little bit more player interaction, and I didn't see a whole lot from that campaign so far. And then we have Positano, which is another one that surprised me because I didn't even know about it till I filmed this video. But I really do like the theme with that one, and I really do like the ideas that come along with it, with the bidding and drafting. Really interested to see how all that plays out. It's definitely one I'll be keeping a close eye on. But feel free to let us know if you'll be backing anything, and I will try to put together another video getting caught up on all the different campaigns that I back or have backed since my previous What I Backed video. I already have 15 games lined up for next week, so it looks like it's going to be another long episode, so I'm not sure where I'm going to find any extra time during the rest of this month, but at least we have a lot of cool games to look forward to. But that's everything I have for you this week. For real this time, I'm actually going to go ahead and end this video finally. Thanks so much for tuning in. I truly do appreciate it. And until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.